Hi, I'm Adam Searle. Here at LocusHarmony, I want to help you take control of your happiness. That's why in this video, I'm talking about the root of all suffering. Okay, on this channel, I try to put out factual information, things that are true, at least as I see them. Now, this subject that I'm talking about, it's a tricky one because the reasons and the root of suffering that I'm going to give here comes from inner investigation. It comes from, thousands, probably many thousands of hours of me sitting, meditating, observing inner processes within myself and seeing repeated patterns in the mind, in the subconscious, the whole mind structure, things that happen again and again, almost of their own volition. And yeah, so that's where this information is coming from. It's not necessarily something that you can read about or find in a study. It's something that you have to go inside and experience yourself to really understand and connect with and believe in. And that's why I'm happy to share this information. It could be wrong. I don't believe that we as humans can ever claim with any certainty that anything is as it seems on many different levels. Take the cause of suffering, for instance. It might seem, or it does seem, I would say, on the surface, that many causes of suffering come from external factors. So before I go into it a bit more, what do I mean by suffering? Just so we're on the same page. It's kind of covering a wide range. So when I say this is the root of all suffering, suffering in that context it can be something minor, like a small amount of suffering. So something like you're frustrated, you're a little bit upset, all the way up to extreme forms of suffering like intense physical pain or intense emotional pain. Those things come from essentially the same process of reacting to the situation in some way, in a specific way. I guess I'll just say what the root of all suffering is as I understand it now, and then I'll go on to explain rather than lead you on and on. The root of all suffering, as I have experienced it, comes from a resistance to what is, or you could word that and understand that as a lack of acceptance. So you could say the suffering that we experience in any given moment is proportional to the lack of acceptance that we have, or the amount of resistance. So the more that we resist what is, the more we suffer. Now, there are more intense forms of suffering, or that's not quite what I mean. What I mean is there are more intense forms of things that happen to us, so they're harder to accept. So there's what comes with that. It seems like the suffering is the thing because that's the thing that seems to have increased, but actually the suffering comes from our increased resistance. Something is taking place, not suffering. Our reaction to that is then what causes the suffering. So I can tell a story on the first time that this kind of clicked with me here. So I'll tell a story. I was meditating. I'd been meditating. I was away on a retreat, and I had, sore back muscles from sitting in pretty much the same position for many hours every day over several days. I was sitting, observing this pain. This was part of the technique on the retreat that I was being taught, or that you do on this retreat that I got on. If you want to know, it was a Vipassana retreat. I've been on quite a few of those. Now, I think this was the first one that I've been on. Anyway, the point was, or is, that I was sat there observing this pain in my back. It's very intense. I can almost remember where it was. There was a very isolated spot, probably about this big, in my back, where the muscles were very angry. Because I was just sitting pretty straight, cross-legged, and the muscle was putting up a lot of resistance, if you like. And I sat with that, and rather than reacting to that pain, pretty intense pain, there's definitely more intense forms of pain, but this was pretty intense. It was almost like cramping in my back, and I just observed it. And as I observed it, it seemed to get more and more and more intense until all of a sudden there was no pain. I could feel the sensation still in my back, but the pain, it wasn't through any sort of form of mental trickery in that I was ignoring the pain. I was moving my concentration away. It's the opposite of that, right? I was very present, very completely aware of that process, to the point that I just allowed it to happen. I didn't will it to go away. I wasn't observing it with the expectation that the pain would stop. I wasn't observing it with the expectation that it should do anything or be anything else. And something clicked in my mind, and I played with that discovery over the coming days and meditation sessions. And what I would do is, in that moment as well, when I first discovered it, I sat there and I observed the feeling, and I sort of let my mind slip, or almost moved my mind out of this kind of, the way I envision it internally is like there's like a balance when you're in this state of acceptance, and it feels you feel very centered. And I guess I've never really said this out loud, but I almost feel like there's an energy that kind of connects or concentrates itself and like meets in the middle of my forehead right here. And when I'm in this balanced state of mind, I'm very aware of that energy. Sounds completely crazy, right? I don't know what that is, or if there's any science to it. It could just be made up and something that is just a representation for me to understand something far more complex. Who knows? Regardless, that's what I feel. And I was toying with this kind of the bridge between this almost physical sensation, and letting my mind slip off of this balancing point, where I did want the pain in my back to go away. So I would allow the thought in, so to speak, that, oh, it's uncomfortable, I need to shift my body weight. I let that part of the mind, I gave it energy, so to speak, and it started stirring up. And it was, I could moment to moment, fractions of a second or less or more, I could play with this. And what I found was that in the very moment that I accepted that physical pain, it wasn't pain anymore. The suffering element went away. And there is a piece in that acceptance as well that can be broadly applied to many things. Now, there was something else that I realized around that moment, at least through this form of meditation, and I'll possibly do another video on this in a bit more detail. And again, this is something that maybe I have not fully discussed out loud, but what I realized as well in that moment, or through these experiences, was the connection, if you like, between mind, the kind of metaphysical, almost abstract mind that doesn't seem to exist, and matter, or the physical reality, or the body and the mind. And there's a bridge between these two things, and that bridge is sensation, is the word that I use to describe it. It's the experience of the physical thing. It's almost physical and mental. And when you calm your mind through for me it's through meditation, but I'm sure there's other ways, you can slip into a state almost where you're kind of bridging this divide, and the boundaries between the two kind of slip away. Like I say, that's kind of another point, but I just feel like it's related, because in that place where the mind, the mental and the physical are one thing, these concepts of suffering, they kind of cease to exist, because I'm thinking of different analogies. It's almost like it, because you think about it as you experience it, it feels like you're going deeper into your mind, but then often the terminology is you've risen above it. So I mean, it's all just words to understand, but I guess what I'm trying to share with these experiences is that there is something else. Because before I had these experiences, and I'm sure some of you watching potentially think this sounds quite crazy, right? Because, and I'm aware of that, saying it out loud, some of these things do sound quite outlandish, because it becomes more and more normal and real life, if you like, what a lot of people tend to refer to as real life, becomes less important, not in a sense that it ceases to exist, but you understand that there's more to life, and it actually adds more to it. Okay, so back to the topic of the video now, suffering. If you are experiencing some form of suffering at this moment, whatever it might be, or maybe you've watched this video and you're thinking about this in the future, it can be very hard to accept suffering. And sometimes it's all well and good me saying you need to accept whatever is there, that's why you're suffering, but suffering can become, in a sense, complex. Now that's not a reason to not, that shouldn't become an excuse. You shouldn't justify your suffering, because ultimately your suffering is going to be self-created, right? So it's best not to allow these excuses, but it is also helpful to understand that if you can think of it almost as a tree, like any collection of suffering that we have. So using the analogy of pain bodies again that I've mentioned before, you can think of a pain body, which is like a collection of energy that we carry. So in this case, it would probably be more emotional, but often people carry physical pain. What am I trying to say? They carry physical pain with these pain bodies. So it's almost like a mental ailment that causes the physical. Now, again, that's a bit of a tangent, but the point that I'm trying to get at here is that whatever suffering, physical or emotional, mental, whatever it is that you're experiencing, generally, things that we carry with us, I don't mean if you've suddenly experienced intense physical trauma, that's probably a little bit different. Still the same principle applies if you can be present and fully accepting. However, I guess more what I'm talking about at the moment are these pain bodies and this emotional suffering and physical suffering that we can carry with us. Now, when we just examine, let's call it the surface level for these causes, the most immediate, so let's say you get angry at something, right? I would call anger a form of suffering because it's a removal from peace. So you are not content and happy in that moment. Therefore, I would say it is a form of suffering, right? Now, it seems that you are angry at something that just occurred, but there's a lot more to it, probably. You're probably carrying around a lot of stuff, right? So this analogy that I'm trying to get at is you can think of that as like the leaves of a tree, like the upper branches and leaves of a tree. And it can seem very complex. You've got all these intertwining spindly branches, and as you go down it seems to wind and get complicated. And sometimes, if the tree's so big, you might need to start at the top of that tree and deal with it, prune the leaves a bit, work with yourself, because the aim there, so working through our suffering in that way, is to get to a point where we can allow ourselves to look at the root. And if you look at the root of this suffering, it's always the process, if you like, that this tree of suffering grows from, what it needs to grow, how it starts growing, the ground that you need to plant the seed in. Okay, it's an analogy, but the process of suffering always comes from this same root. And yeah, so the tree analogy is kind of to point out two things here. One, it's that if this tree is huge, maybe you can't go straight to the root, because maybe you have to work your way down the tree a bit and just work with your suffering, right? If you're suffering right now, the best thing you can do is try your best to accept it. I'll give you now something practical that you can do that will aid in that, right? So if you sit and close your eyes and breathe in through your nose, close your mouth, and just observe the physical sensation on the nostril. So the feeling of the air, maybe in or around the nose, and just be with that breath and just sit with it. As your breath comes in and as your breath comes out, just observe it. Okay, so pause the video. You can do that as many times as you want. What that's going to do is it's going to put you into, on a sort of immediate kind of almost surface level, but a little bit of a deeper level too. It's going to put you in a place where you are present and accepting of the present moment, because you were just observing the breath as it was there and observing the breath as it went out. And there would have been a moment, almost definitely, might have been small, might have been big, where there was no suffering. Now that's it. The ego gets involved and there's lots of explanations for it, but essentially the root of your suffering is a lack of acceptance. There might be for you some level of understanding or realization potentially in that exercise that just happened there. Potentially you, even if you're not suffering and you give it a go, you might find that attention you didn't realize you kind of had about you released a little. And it's the same process. It's because for however long you were present, the body and the mind were in alignment. The mind and the breath and everything was one. Now the breath is a very interesting tool because it's this kind of bridge between the conscious and the subconscious. We can consciously breathe, or if we let it happen, the breath just happens. Now, I think there's something in that, and I think that's why the breath is so commonly used in meditation, because it's a doorway almost to let that, to this understanding of the connection between the mind and the body. Now, again, sticking with this analogy of a tree, let's say that a new seed is planted, and as it grows, it's a seed of anger maybe. So that's the example I used before. And as it grows into a tree of anger, and that is carried around with us. Now, another, if you like, case for the root of all suffering, as I'm putting it across here, through as I said, many thousands of hours of meditation and just observing, even, meditation sitting, but also walking meditation, general mindfulness, and just observing my thoughts. When you start this process and you take time to actively observe these processes, you see these patterns pop up again and again. So I've given an example there, and that might be enough for you. You might have seen it a few times before and been like, oh, and now you made the connection, or you might be the first time, or you might need more examples to get to the understanding, because it doesn't seem to be so on the surface. It seems like the causes of our suffering are external reasons, and it takes patience and a kind of determination to dig. It kind of I don't want to say dig, because it's not like it's effort. It's patience is a better word for it, because you just allow it to happen, and then you see these processes taking place. When you're present, you witness potentially, maybe not the planting of one of these trees, but the planting of one of these trees. Sometimes they're very hard to catch in the moment, right? But that is a planting of a new seed, because they tend to come from a reaction, right? So something happens and we react, sticking with this anger or frustration as an example. Someone does something, we react. In a way, when we've reacted, we're not present, we're not fully present, because we're reacting and we're not observing. Now, the point that I'm trying to get at here is that we learn as we practice that all these trees need the same fuel, if you like. They need, a real tree needs, water and sunlight, right? But what the trees of suffering need is resistance. They need an energy. So, when you start working on these trees, actually, and the analogy kind of falls apart a bit here, but I have found through meditation, things have come to the surface as I've been sitting there in moments of acceptance. Let's say fear, because that's the example that came to my mind. Not focused on any specific thing, just a fear, images of things that are inherently scary, or nothing is inherently scary if we're going with this explanation, and that is what I'm saying, really. But so I didn't react to these things because there is no inherent scariness, right? So I'll give a more concrete example. I was meditating with my eyes shut, and images were flashing up of, nasty things that I hadn't seen. I don't know, who knows where they were coming from. Like, these images were coming up, and as I sat and observed them, I realized, as I entered into this state of acceptance and just observing and presence, the hold that they had over me, so to speak, lessened. And the way I kind of understood it at the time, I think, was, imagine there's like a big, dinosaur, like a T-Rex. It's like genuinely frightening, and it's this massive creature, right? It's kind of like the embodiment of your fear. And as you observe it and don't react to it, it gets a little bit smaller. And then it keeps shrinking, and it keeps shrinking. And it's almost like, as you just don't react to it, it gets smaller and smaller until you realize it's actually this tiny thing that almost doesn't exist at that moment, that needs you to feel a certain way in order for it to exist. And as soon as you don't feel that way, it doesn't exist anymore. So it's just another example of suffering there, and how by being accepting of the present moment and being present, the suffering evaporates. It can't exist with presence. And it's a hard thing to do, because the example with the back pain earlier, even since I know that this is the case, sometimes I've been meditating and I've had back pain, and so I've tried to observe it, but what I'm doing there is I'm observing it in an attempt to make it go away. So that doesn't work. You need to enter this state of acceptance, and that can be tricky to do, and it's something that you just have to allow to happen. Okay, so the theme here at LocusHarmony, this YouTube channel, I come at it from many different angles, but what I'm trying to share is the understanding that we, everyone, is in control of their happiness, and trying to get across that there's things that you can do if you're not happy to take responsibility for that. So, take responsibility of your happiness, own your happiness, take control of your happiness. That's, I think this video is a really, really strongly ties into that theme, because when I've got it depends when you watch the video, but my kind of taglines are exploration, understanding, happiness. And that's because, sorry if you can hear the neighbors stomping around. Through exploration, inner exploration, we come to these understandings of ourselves, and it's through these understandings that we can find happiness, right? And I mean, I've mentioned before, and when I was younger, I wasn't very happy, right? I had depression for many years, and it's almost because of that I was kind of motivated, or probably is, that and other factors, but it was definitely a big factor in why I was motivated to explore. I think a lot of people, they're coasting along life. I think that's the right phrase. It doesn't feel right. They're coasting along in life, and which is fine, right? They're probably content, but it means that you never necessarily need to investigate these things. So you just go about day to day, you do your life, and you get little annoyances, little things here and there. But I'm very grateful for the intense suffering that I've experienced in my past, because it's really helped me, or it motivated me to explore and to understand my own happiness. And the cause of happiness, because this video is about suffering, but happiness, I believe, and I've talked about this in other videos, it's something that's just there. You don't really need to do anything. You just need to get out the way of yourself. Like, if you can, so that's why this video, at least the point of this video, what I'm trying to make, and I hope I'm getting it across, but that if we can stop causing our own suffering and accept what is there, the happiness just follows from that, right? Okay, so if you stuck with me this long, there's probably something in you that resonates with what I'm saying, right? If you're listening to this, you're already doing what I was talking about, the exploration. The understanding comes from that, and the happiness comes from that. Like, if you're not in a great place, I just want to say, like, it does get better. I wrote a diary many years ago. I haven't written it for a long time, but I remember I was writing it while I was quite depressed. It was over, I was depressed for years, and I went back to read it, and I remember I'd written in my diary almost like a message to my future self, but I didn't know I was going to read it. But I was writing to myself saying it does get better, because my depression, I was like down here for a long time, and I kind of wiggled my way up and up and down, but so during one of my initial ups, I wrote a message to myself, and I just was saying it does get better, stick it through. And I guess I had another down period, because I remember coming back to that and reading that, and it really helped me to, it just helped me to know that, right? And so even if that's all you get from this video, to know that if you're not in a great place, it does get better. then that's great too. But what I started saying there, and what I was trying to get at, is even if you don't fully believe what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is quite a strong point, right? And I understand that. I'm saying that any negative experience that you have comes from inside of yourself. Now that can seem ridiculous on the surface, because you can just instantly explain that away and not investigate at all. You can say, no, look at it, like I just cut my hand off, my hand hurts, of course it's external. But if you really can take the time, maybe on a meditation retreat, just through life, understanding and exploring and witnessing, when it comes to those things, if it's your hand's just cut off, you're not going to be like, oh, I just accept it. But if you've done the practice prior, and you've worked your way through and maybe built up your ability to remain present, not that you have to do that either. Like some people have, terrible accidents and they're forced into acceptance. But either way, you will have experiences just knowing this, because it's life, it's going to happen. It's the truth as I've understood it. You will start to see these things happening. You will, it can be anything minor, like you'll stub your toe and you can be like, swearing and kicking off and holding your toe and screaming and tense, and you're like, stop. Or you just come to your breath, or you just observe the pain as it is, and you just realize, oh, it actually isn't that bad. So end it on a positive note there, I guess. It isn't that bad. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I do believe this, and I do believe that we are in control of our happiness. Like the moment that we start to believe that, the moment that we start taking control, the instant that it starts working, as soon as you believe you're in control of your happiness, you'll start feeling better. All right, so thank you for watching. I hope that made some sense. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll try and respond to those. And yeah, just if you need any clarification, I do understand what I'm talking about is it's hard to understand if you haven't experienced it. So I've tried to give some examples here that potentially you have experienced, or you can pay attention to going forward, or with the breathing exercise, maybe that you had one here, an experience of, oh, interesting, the suffering did go away. Anyway, thank you for watching. Cheers.